The laughter faded the moment he stepped forward. The clatter of silverware stopped. Wine glasses stilled midair. Conversations across the chandelier-lit dining hall of the Crystal Garden turned into frozen snapshots as all eyes locked on a single man. He wasn't tall enough to command attention. He didn't shout or make a scene. He simply stepped between the two black belt fighters and the woman they had cornered. And he wore an apron. Jake Walker, the quiet server with shaggy hair and an old green military jacket, didn't even flinch when the larger of the two martial artists pointed a mocking finger in his face. "This isn't your fight, Grandpa," the man sneered, laughing as he leaned in close. "Walk away." Behind Jake stood Rachel Bennett, CEO of Bennett Enterprises, dressed in a crimson satin dress, her pearl necklace trembling with every breath. Her chair had been kicked aside moments earlier. She didn't know what was more terrifying, the trained fighters in front of her, or the silence that now enveloped the room. Jake's voice was calm, low. "You're making a mistake." The second fighter grabbed Jake's collar, roughly trying to push him back. The tug popped the top button of his jacket. His shirt shifted slightly. And that's when everything changed. A faint outline of a tattoo appeared, not flashy, not showy, just one symbol inked deep into the right side of his chest. Barely visible, but unmistakable. The Eagle Globe and anchor, the emblem of the United States Marine Corps. The hand on Jake's collar froze. The smirk on the second fighter's face melted into wide-eyed panic. His lips parted, but no sound came out. Slowly his hand dropped. He stepped back as if he'd touched something sacred. The first fighter looked confused. "What's wrong with you?" Jake didn't move. He didn't have to. The tattoo had spoken louder than any punch ever could, and across the restaurant servers, bartenders, even the pianist, watched in stunned silence as the two fighters hesitated, then backed off. One of them whispered something under his breath before turning around and slipping out through the velvet curtain. The other followed. No one stopped them. Jake turned to Rachel, gave her a small nod, and walked back toward the kitchen as if none of it had happened. Sometimes the loudest voice in the room is the one that doesn't raise itself. And sometimes the man behind the apron is the one who once held the line when no one else could. Like stories where quiet heroes change everything with one silent act. Hit that heart, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to follow Jake's journey. Because some tattoos aren't for show, they're a vow. The manager rushed to Rachel's side. "Are you all right, Ms. Bennett?" She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes were still fixed on the kitchen doors that had just swung shut behind the man in the faded olive jacket. The same man who had stood between her and two professional fighters, without raising his voice, without clenching his fists, without breaking a sweat. She finally blinked. "Who is he?" The manager looked hesitant. Jake Walker. He works part-time here. Singledad. Keeps to himself." "That wasn't just a server," Rachel said, softly straightening her dress. "That was someone who's seen war." She glanced around the room. People were returning to their conversations. The pianist picked up his melody again, as if trying to erase what had just occurred. But Rachel knew better. She had been around powerful men all her life in boardrooms at global summits on private jets, and not one of them had ever made her feel what that man just did with one step and a half-revealed symbol on his chest. Safe. She sat back down, slowly brushing the pearls at her neck, but her mind was no longer on the contract in front of her. It was on the man who had returned to the kitchen without waiting for thanks or applause, the man with the kind eyes, the tired hands, the battle-worn jacket, and the tattoo that froze the bar cold. Rachel Bennett didn't sleep that night. The luxury penthouse suite in the Four Seasons, with its silk sheets and floor-to-ceiling view of Manhattan, offered no comfort. The lights of the city blinked below her, but her mind replayed a single moment again and again, the way he stepped forward, the way the fighter's laughter died, and the look in his eyes not rage, not pride, but something deeper. Dignity. Rachel had faced hostile takeovers, lawsuits, even a helicopter emergency landing once. But nothing unnerved her like the quiet presence of the man who'd stepped between her and danger and then walked away without a word. She didn't even get to say thank you. The next afternoon she returned to the Crystal Garden, not in pearls, not in heels. She wore jeans and a beige coat. Her assistant had raised an eyebrow, but she'd waved her off. "I forgot something important," she said. It wasn't a lie. She sat at the same table. The maitre d' recognized her instantly and straightened up. "Ms. Bennett, I hope you're well. About last night, I'm fine," she said gently. "I just wanted to thank someone." He nodded toward the kitchen. "Jake's here." "Should I?" She hesitated. "No. Let me." The kitchen was smaller than she expected, organized, clean humming, with the quiet clatter of metal and movement. Jake stood at the far counter, back turned slicing carrots, with the precision of a man who'd cut things far more dangerous. His olive green jacket was draped on a nearby hook. He wore a plain white t-shirt beneath his apron. She cleared her throat. "Jake," he turned slowly. No surprise in his eyes, just the same calm depth that had frozen her yesterday. "Ms. Bennett," he said, setting the knife down. "You're okay, I came to say thank you," she said, walking closer. "And to ask." "Why?" He gave a small shrug. Seemed like the right thing to do. Rachel studied his face. Strong jaw, a few lines near his eyes. Tired, maybe. But not bitter. "That tattoo," she said softly. "Marine Corps, right?" Jake nodded once. "Yes, ma'am." "Were you active?" He wiped his hands on a towel. 15 years. "Retired early after my daughter was born. She's lucky," Rachel said, "to have a father like you." Something in his eyes flickered a softness behind the steel. "Her name's Ellie. She's 9, smart as a whip, loves lemon pie." Rachel smiled despite herself. "I'd like to meet her someday." He looked hesitant. "We live quiet, just the two of us." "I understand." She paused, unsure if she should press further. But there was something inside her curiosity. Yes, but more than that. A pull. "Jake, most people would have just called security. You stepped into harm's way." Why, he met her gaze evenly. "Because in my world, you don't wait for someone else to do the right thing. You either stand up, or you stand aside." Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, just full. Then he said quietly, "You don't owe me anything." Rachel looked down at her hands. "That's the thing. I've spent my whole life around men who think I owe them something. And here you are, the only one who ever stood up for me without asking for a damn thing." Jake didn't respond. He simply reached for a clean towel and began drying his knife. "I'd like to buy you dinner," she said suddenly. He looked up. "Ms. Bennett, Rachel." He hesitated. "Rachel, you don't have to do that," "I know," she said, and smiled. "But I want to." They met 2 nights later at a quiet diner just outside the city. Not a place for suits or press. Just 2 people sitting across from each other, talking about things that mattered. Books. Ellie loved how Jake made the perfect crust on a pie, how Rachel used to sneak out of prep school to read poetry in the library. No business talk. No headlines. Just life. And in that quiet corner of the world, something began to soften between them. Not romance, not yet. But something purer. Recognition. She saw in him the kind of man who'd carry someone else's pain without ever mentioning his own. He saw in her a woman used to leading armies of suits, but who longed to be understood without having to speak. And when they said goodnight, she didn't lean in for a kiss. Neither did he. But as he walked her to her car, Jake said softly, "You have a good heart, Rachel. Most people don't see that in CEOs." She smiled. "Most people don't look." Jake wasn't sure why he'd agreed to let Rachel meet Ellie. Maybe it was the way she listened, not with her ears, but with her whole presence. Or maybe it was the quiet honesty in her eyes, the kind that didn't ask for explanations, only truth. But whatever the reason, on a brisk Saturday afternoon, he found himself standing on the porch of a modest white-frame house on a sleepy street in Queens, brushing crumbs off his faded green military jacket as Rachel's car pulled up to the curb. She stepped out in jeans boots and a navy sweater, casual but still elegant. A far cry from the crimson gown she wore the night they met. "This is nice," she said, looking around. "It feels real." Jake offered a half smile. "It's not much, but Ellie calls it home." The front door creaked open before he could knock. A small voice rang out clear and excited. Daddy Ellie burst out in a swirl of curls, denim overalls, and untied shoelaces. She hugged Jake tightly, then looked up at Rachel with curious, wide hazel eyes. Jake crouched beside her. "Ellie, this is Miss Rachel. Remember, I told you about the lady at the restaurant." Ellie nodded. "The one you saved?" Rachel crouched, too. "I think your dad saved us both, to be honest." Ellie gave a shy smile, then tugged Rachel's hand. "Come see my science project." "It's a solar oven. We're baking marshmallows," Jake sighed. "One at a time, kiddo. Let her breathe." But Rachel laughed and followed Ellie inside, where sunlight poured through lace curtains, and the air smelled faintly of lemon soap and warm wood. The house was small, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, but spotless. Worn but cared for, like the man who lived in it. In the kitchen, Ellie pointed proudly to a cardboard and foil contraption sitting on the windowsill. "We're testing angles of reflection. Daddy helped me glue it. We got marshmallows from Mr. Kaplan next door." Rachel leaned down. "Do you always do science on Saturdays?" "Only when we're not making lemon pie," Ellie said. "That's the rule." Jake chuckled. "It's more of a tradition than a rule." Rachel turned to him. "So that's real. Your daughter's famous lemon pie. She's the critic. I'm just the chef." Ellie grinned. "Want to help us make one?" Soon, the kitchen was alive with flower zest and laughter. Jake moved like someone who'd found peace in routine measuring, mixing, humming softly under his breath. Rachel rolled dough beside Ellie, listening as the girl chattered about school, her 3rd-grade teacher, and how she planned to become an astronaut marine baker someday. Jake looked over from the stove. "You're gonna need 3 uniforms." "I'll sew them," Ellie declared. Rachel watched them smiling, not the curated smile she wore at board meetings, but the real kind, the one she'd nearly forgotten she had. She hadn't felt this safe in years. As the pie baked, Jake poured coffee, and the 3 of them sat on the back steps with mismatched mugs. Autumn leaves swirled around their feet. Rachel took a sip. "You've built something beautiful here, Jake." He glanced at Ellie, who was drawing suns with chalk on the pavement. "I just try not to mess it up. You're doing more than that." Jake looked at her, a rare vulnerability in his eyes. "After the core, I couldn't sleep. Noise in my head wouldn't stop. Then Ellie came along, and I figured, if I could make one place in this world quiet and safe for her, maybe that'd be enough." Rachel didn't speak for a moment. Then softly, "It is." When the pie was ready, they ate it, warm right out of the oven, sitting on stools, with plates balanced on their knees. Rachel took a bite, closed her eyes. "Okay, that's it. Best pie I've ever had." Ellie beamed. "Told you." Jake smiled, the lines at the corners of his eyes softening. She's never wrong about dessert. As the sky turned lavender and gold, Rachel stood at the door, preparing to leave. Ellie hugged her tight. "Come again," the little girl said. "Next Saturday. We're making cinnamon rolls." Rachel looked to Jake, who gave a small nod. "I'd like that," she said. She stepped onto the porch, paused. "Jake," He met her gaze. You didn't just build a quiet life. You built a place where someone like me could breathe again. Thank you. He didn't answer, but something in his expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but a kind of softening, as if her words had slipped past the guarded walls he'd spent years building. She walked to her car, heart full, and didn't look back until she reached the street. When she did, he was still standing there, arms folded, watching. Not to make sure she was safe, just to make sure she knew someone cared. Jake didn't own a suit. When Rachel invited him to a charity gala as her guest just to say, "Thank you," she'd said he nearly declined. But Ellie, with all the persuasive might of a 9-year-old, armed with glitter markers and homemade tickets, had insisted he go. Heroes don't stay in the kitchen forever, Daddy, she'd told him, slipping a red crayon drawing into his palm. In it, he wore a cape and carried a pie. So now here he was, standing in the corner of a marble ballroom at the Roosevelt Grand, tugging at the collar of his cleanest shirt and wishing he'd worn his apron just to feel normal. The olive green of his military jacket faded and patched, in places stood out in the sea of tuxedos. He didn't care. But when Rachel walked in, everything else faded. She wore a deep red gown that shimmered like candlelight. Hair swept up diamond studs in her ears, but it wasn't the dress or the makeup. It was the way she carried herself, poised, yet vulnerable, powerful, yet searching. Her eyes scanned the room, and then they found him. She smiled. And in that moment, Jake Walker, ex-Marine, single father, and part-time line cook, felt something unfamiliar and dangerous stir in his chest, the beginning of a longing he'd buried long ago. They sat at a small side table during the second half of the event, avoiding the spotlight. Rachel ordered champagne. Jake stuck with water. "I'm glad you came," she said, lifting her glass. "You clean up well." Jake gave a soft chuckle. "Ellie threatened to glue rhinestones to my jacket if I said no." Rachel laughed, and something inside her relaxed. "She's wonderful, Jake. Confident, funny, kind. She's everything good I've ever done," he said simply. A pause. Then she leaned in, voice low. "Can I ask you something?" Jake nodded. The tattoo. That night. One of those men, he was afraid of it. Not just surprised. He looked like he saw a ghost. Jake's face didn't change, but his jaw tightened. Rachel continued carefully. "I don't need details. I just want to understand." He looked out at the ballroom, the chandeliers, the laughter, the clinking of crystal. Then he spoke. It was a unit tattoo. "My brothers and I, we served together in Helmand. We were sent in during a collapse. No air support, no clear exit. They called it a suicide op." Rachel's breath caught. She said nothing. "We made it out. But not all of us." He glanced down. "The ink, it's not just a symbol. It's a memory. And a warning." "A warning?" she asked gently. "That the man wearing it isn't like the others." He met her eyes now. "When I left the Corps, I told myself I'd never raise my fists again. Not unless I had to. I've spent every year since trying to become the kind of man Ellie deserves. One who doesn't scare people when he walks into a room." Rachel's eyes softened. "Jake, you didn't scare me. You made me feel safe. That matters more." He blinked once, then looked away. Later that evening, as the crowd dwindled and the band played softer jazz, Rachel walked with him outside onto the rooftop terrace. The city lights stretched endlessly, casting gold over glass. "It's strange," she said. "I've been to hundreds of these events, raised millions, signed deals that moved markets. But tonight, I don't want to talk to anyone but you." Jake leaned on the railing, looking out at the skyline. "I'm not exactly good company. You're honest company. That's rarer." He glanced at her, then nodded toward her dress. "Red suits you." She smiled. "You noticed I may be quiet, but I'm not blind." Rachel looked down, then slowly back at him. You know, when I was 25, I used to think love would come like lightning, fast, dazzling, impossible to ignore. Jake raised an eyebrow. And now I think it's quieter. Like a man who stands between you and danger, then goes back to the kitchen like nothing happened. A breeze passed between them. For a second, neither spoke. Then Jake said, "You don't know what you're saying yes to, Rachel. My life isn't shiny. It's 4 a.m. Wake-up's laundry in the sink, and a daughter who believes pancakes fix everything." Rachel smiled. Sounds like something worth showing up for. When he walked her to her car, she didn't ask for another dinner. She didn't lean in for a kiss. She simply rested her hand on his arm and said, "I'm glad I found the quietest man in the room that night." And Jake, the man with the tattoo, the apron and a heart wrapped in silence, looked into her eyes and said almost in a whisper, "So am I." The scent hit Rachel before the door even opened, warm, golden, and unmistakably homemade. Lemon. Not the artificial kind piped into 5-star pastries, but the honest aroma of real citrus sugar and something deeper, something like comfort. Jake opened the door with one hand, a flour-smudged dish towel tossed over his shoulder. His usual olive jacket was replaced by a simple t-shirt and that same white apron she was beginning to associate with safety. Behind him, Ellie called out excitedly, "She's here, Daddy! She's really here!" Rachel stepped into the modest home again, smiling as the girl nearly bounced into her arms. "You came just in time." Ellie grinned. "We're making the final swirl." "The swirl?" Rachel asked. Jake stepped aside with a chuckle. "Ellie's signature move. No lemon pie is complete without it." "Come on." Ellie tugged her hand toward the kitchen like a general leading a mission. The kitchen, though small, was a world of its own. Measuring spoons on the counter, flour footprints on the floor, a cooling crust on the windowsill. Rachel rolled up her sleeves. "All right, Chef, where do you want me?" Ellie handed her a wooden spoon, swirl duty. Together they leaned over the bowl as Jake poured in the filling thick, buttery yellow with zest curling through. Ellie guided Rachel's hand in slow, careful spirals. "Swirl gently," the little girl said seriously. "Too fast, and you break the lemon spell." Rachel stifled a laugh. "That sounds important." "It is," Jake added. "We've only had 2 swirl disasters this year." Ellie giggled. "Don't tell her about the Christmas one." Jake gave a mock-wounded look. "That one was sabotage. You added glitter." "Festive glitter," Ellie defended. "It was a holiday." Rachel laughed, full real laughter that rang off the old kitchen walls like sunshine. For the first time in a long time, it wasn't performance. It wasn't strategy. It was joy. While the pie baked, Jake set out a small table on the porch. Mismatched chairs, chipped mugs, a pitcher of sweet tea. Nothing about it was curated or elegant, but it felt right. Ellie brought out a hand-drawn sign taped to cardboard: "Today's special lemon pie and new friends." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Didn't know I was running a bistro." "You are now," Ellie said proudly. Rachel watched them, father and daughter, moving in rhythm without words, like they'd built a life of quiet rituals. Saturday baking porch, talks, unsaid understandings. It moved her more than she expected. When the pie finally emerged from the oven, it looked perfect. Golden edges, bright center, and the swirl flawless. Jake sliced, carefully handed each of them a plate. Rachel took her first bite, then paused. "You okay?" Jake asked. She looked up, eyes wide. "This is incredible. I've been to Paris, you know. Dined at places with Michelin stars." Jake smirked. "And they've got nothing on this." Ellie beamed. "Told you." They ate slowly, quietly. The kind of silence that happens not from awkwardness, but from satisfaction. The wind rustled through the maple trees. A neighbor's dog barked somewhere down the block. The world outside kept moving, But here on this porch, time felt suspended. After the plates were cleared, and Ellie ran inside to grab her sketchbook, Rachel and Jake stayed behind, leaning back in their chairs. "You've given her such a beautiful life," Rachel said softly. Jake looked toward the open screen door, where Ellie's laughter could still be heard. "I try." "No," she said. "You did. You are." Jake didn't speak for a while. Then I used to wonder if I could be enough for her. Just me. No mother, no big family. Just this house and the smell of lemon. "You're more than enough," Rachel whispered. "She's loved. She's safe. And she's so alive." Jake looked at her. Really looked. "So are you, you know. Different than the first night I met you. Less armor." Rachel smiled. "Armor's overrated. Sometimes. But it keeps people standing." She turned toward him. "Jake, when you stepped in that night, it wasn't just about stopping those men. You reminded me that not everyone wants something from me, that some people still protect because it's who they are, not what they're after." He looked down at his hands, calloused but steady. "I wasn't always that man. You are now." He looked up, and for a moment their eyes held something deeper, not a declaration, not yet, but a promise. Ellie returned with her sketchbook, holding it open between them. "I drew us," she said proudly. The picture showed 3 stick figures, one tall, with long hair, one smaller, with a dress, and one grinning with wild curls. Rachel pointed. "Is that me?" Ellie nodded. "You're holding the pie. Daddy's holding your hand." Rachel glanced at Jake. He hadn't seen the drawing yet. He looked down, then back at her. And this time he didn't look away. As the sun dipped low and the first stars blinked awake, Rachel stood to leave. Ellie hugged her, then ran back inside to finish coloring the drawing. Jake walked Rachel to her car, hands in his pockets. "I can't remember the last time a Saturday felt this full," she said. "You're welcome anytime," Jake said. "Ellie already thinks you're family." Rachel hesitated. "And what about you?" Jake met her gaze. "I think I'm still learning how to let good things in. But you're welcome too." She smiled. "Good. Because next Saturday I'm bringing cinnamon rolls." He chuckled. "Guess I'll cancel our plans for boring old peace and quiet." She climbed into her car, but lingered with the door open. But where she tapped the steering wheel. "Thank you for letting me see your world." He nodded. "Thank you for not turning away." As she drove off, Jake stood for a long moment on the sidewalk, watching the tail lights disappear. Then he turned back toward the porch, toward the house that smelled of sugar sun and new beginnings. It began with a spilled drink. A clumsy accident by a drunk customer, red wine, splashing across white linen, dripping onto an expensive silk blouse. A sharp gasp. A chair shoved back too hard. Then a voice, loud, slurred, and laced with entitlement. "You idiot. Do you even know how much this shirt costs?" Jake didn't flinch. He merely stepped forward with a clean cloth, his movements calm, practiced. "I'm sorry, sir. Let me get that cleaned up." The man stood 6'2", tanned and glossy in a designer suit. His girlfriend dabbed at her blouse, scowling. The man shoved Jake's shoulder, not hard, but enough to make a statement. "You think sorry is good enough," he sneered. "Where's your manager, Dino?" Rachel was at the far end of the restaurant, reviewing wine pairings with a client. She heard the commotion first, then saw Jake standing still, cloth in hand, while the man loomed over him. She moved quickly but silently, her heels soft against the hardwood. The manager was already approaching, flustered. Jake shook his head subtly. "It's fine," he murmured. But the man wasn't done. "You think wearing some fake army jacket makes you important? What are you even doing here? Can't get a real job." The air changed. The room didn't fall silent like it had that night with the fighters, but something in the tension shifted. A few nearby tables turned to look. Rachel reached the table just as the man said it. "You're nothing but a washed-up nobody in a second-hand coat." Jake didn't respond. He didn't raise his voice, didn't clench his fists. He simply took a breath, nodded once and said, "You're right. I'm sorry for the inconvenience," and he walked away. Rachel stared after him, stunned. She turned to the man. That nobody served 15 years in the United States Marine Corps. Show some respect. The man blinked, unsure how to react. His girlfriend stared at Rachel like she'd just interrupted a private performance. Rachel didn't wait for a response. She followed Jake into the back corridor where the staff lockers were. He was rinsing out the cloth in the sink methodically. "Jake," she said softly. He didn't turn. She stepped closer. "Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you stop him?" He wrung out the towel, then finally looked at her. "Because Ellie's waiting for me to come home tonight," he said. "Because some battles aren't worth the noise." She searched his face. "But he insulted you. He shoved you." Jake leaned against the counter, tired. Not from the shift, but from something deeper. "I've spent years learning how not to react," he said. "There was a time when I would have put him on the ground before he finished his sentence. But what would that teach my daughter? That her father solves problems with his fists. That being right is worth being reckless." Rachel swallowed hard. He was cruel. "You didn't deserve that." Jake shrugged. Life's full of people like him. Full of people looking for a fight they don't even understand. I'm not giving them that anymore. There was a quiet between them filled only by the slow drip of the sink. Then Rachel said, "That's the bravest thing I've seen anyone do." He looked surprised. "You could have made him look small?" "You had every right," she continued. "But you chose grace. You walked away with dignity. And I hope Ellie learns to be just like you." Jake looked down, jaw clenched, as if trying to push back an emotion he hadn't expected. "She already is," he said quietly. Later that night, Rachel sat across from him on a bench outside the restaurant, 2 paper cups of coffee in their hands. The city hummed gently around them, cars passing, distant laughter, the glow of street lamps soft against brick. "I used to think strength was loud," she said. "Taking up space. Never backing down. That's what I was taught to be in business, firm, unyielding." Jake took a sip. "Sometimes that's true. But then I met you," she said. "And now I think strength might just be quiet. The kind that walks away when it could destroy." He didn't answer right away. Then glancing at her, he said, "It's not easy. Sometimes I still hear my own blood shouting at me to fight back." She looked at him. "But you don't." He shook his head. "Not unless someone I love is in danger." The weight of his words settled over them like a blanket. Rachel studied his face in the dim light, the lines etched by storms, weathered not age, the steadiness in his voice, the humility in his silence. She reached for his hand, fingers brushing his knuckles. "You're more than you think you are, Jake Walker." He looked at her almost skeptically. "You're not just a good father. You're the kind of man who changes the room just by staying calm in the storm. That's rare." He let out a soft breath. "I'm just trying to be better than I was yesterday." Rachel squeezed his hand gently. "That's what heroes do." And this time, Jake didn't let go. The old man wiped his hands on his apron, then slid the faded folder across the stainless steel countertop. "You didn't hear this from me," George muttered, glancing toward the kitchen door. "Jake doesn't talk about it. Ever." Rachel hesitated before picking it up. The man across from her, grizzled, sharp-eyed, and quiet, had been the head chef at the Crystal Garden for longer than she'd been in business. His reputation was as consistent as his roast duck. But in the last week, she had caught him watching her and Jake more than once, as if calculating whether she deserved to know what Jake refused to say. Now, apparently, he'd made up his mind. Rachel opened the folder. Inside was a single laminated newspaper clipping the edges worn and yellowing with age. She recognized the masthead, the stars and stripes, dated October 2009. The headline read, "Marine saves 5 children during ambush in Fallujah." Her eyes widened. The photo was grainy, printed in black and white, but unmistakable. A younger Jake Walker, barely 30, crouched in the dirt, his uniform torn and bloodied. In his arms, 2 children clung to him. One was barefoot, the other had a bleeding shoulder. Behind him, smoke curled from the remains of a Humvee. In his eyes, even through the blur, was that same expression she'd come to know, focused, alert, unshakable. Rachel's hands trembled as she read. In what commanders are calling a selfless act of impossible bravery. Sergeant Jake Walker of the United States Marine Corps led a group of wounded civilians, including 5 Iraqi children, through enemy fire after his unit was ambushed outside Fallujah. Though injured himself, Walker refused evacuation until every child was secured. The rest blurred. George's voice broke the silence. He came home with a Bronze Star and a shattered shoulder. Never talks about either. Rachel looked up. Why would he hide this? George shrugged. Because Jake doesn't care what the world thinks of him. He only cares about the girl in his house who calls him Dad. And maybe now, the woman who looks at him like she sees something more. Rachel folded the clipping carefully, then paused. Why are you showing me this? The old chef smiled a little sadly. Because you asked me yesterday why a man like him works here for minimum wage, washing dishes and bussing tables, when he could probably run his own company. And George leaned closer. He doesn't need glory. He's looking for peace, and I think he finally found a sliver of it. He nodded toward her. With you. That night, Rachel couldn't sleep. The photo burned in her mind, not just because of what Jake had done, that alone would have earned him 100 magazine covers, but because of how deliberately he'd chosen to leave it behind. She sat on her living room floor, the article spread out before her like some sacred relic. Around her, the quiet hum of the city pushed against her windows. But inside, everything was still. She thought of how many people she'd met in her life who needed recognition, who craved applause. And then, there was Jake, the man who protected strangers like it was instinct, the man who endured insults in silence, the man who showed up for her daughter's science fair, the man who never once mentioned Fallujah. Rachel wiped a tear before it fell. He wasn't hiding his past. He was protecting his present. The next afternoon, she showed up at his house with no warning, pie in hand. Jake opened the door, eyebrows lifting in surprise. To what do we owe this ambush? Rachel held up the tin. Ellie told me yesterday, you've never had raspberry pecan. I came to fix that. Jake stepped aside, smirking. You're playing dirty now. Inside, Ellie rushed to greet her, arms full of a new science kit. The girl barely noticed the adults exchanging glances across the room. As Jake set plates on the table, Rachel watched him, the steady hands, the relaxed posture, the way he gently pushed Ellie's curls back from her face. And she decided she wouldn't say anything. Not yet. Not about Fallujah. Not about the article. Not about the photo that made her chest ache with admiration. Instead, as they ate pie and talked about constellations, Rachel asked Jake the simplest question she could think of. What makes you happy? He blinked, then glanced at Ellie, who was now busy explaining how stars die. Days like this, he said. When no one's bleeding. When there's pie. When Ellie's laughing. Rachel smiled. That's it. Jake leaned back in his chair. That's everything. And somehow she knew he meant it. Later that night, as she was leaving, Jake walked her to the car again. It had become their quiet ritual. She turned to him before opening the door. Jake, if someone knew something about your past, something brave and unbelievable but didn't say anything, would that bother you? He studied her for a moment, then shook his head. No. People are allowed to carry their own stories the way they want. Rachel nodded slowly. I'm just saying, he added. If someone did know, I'd hope they'd understand why I left it behind. She smiled. I do. Jake stepped back. Good night, Rachel. As she drove away, Rachel knew something had shifted, not just in how she saw him, but in how she saw herself. Because loving someone like Jake meant learning to hold silence the way he did. Not as avoidance, but as reverence. The place wasn't listed on any food blogs, no sleek Instagram page, no reservation system, just a chipped neon sign that read, Betty's Diner in flickering pink letters, and a menu written in Sharpie on a board that hadn't been updated since the Clinton administration. Jake held the door open. Hope you're okay with no white tablecloths tonight. Rachel stepped inside and smiled. As long as they serve something that doesn't come with edible gold, I'll survive. The diner smelled of old vinyl grilled onions and fresh brewed coffee, oddly comforting. The kind of place where the waitress knew your name and your grief. They took a booth by the window, cracked slightly to let in the evening breeze. Across the street, the Crystal Garden glowed with formality. But here, the lights were soft, the clatter was human, and the waitress's name tag read, Charlene. Jake ordered coffee. Rachel followed his lead. You come here often? She asked, scanning the laminated menu. He nodded. First place I found when I moved here. Ellie loves the milkshakes. I like the silence. Charlene brought over 2 mugs, set them down with a wink. He never brings anyone here, she said to Rachel, then walked away without elaboration. Rachel raised a brow. Should I feel special? Jake leaned back. She says that to all the women I don't bring. They talked for a while about nothing and everything. Rachel told him about her childhood in Maine, how her mother taught her to bake out of necessity, and how her father once told her that emotions were best kept out of business. Jake shared stories about Ellie's obsession with space, how she once tried to build a telescope out of soda bottles, and how their first pie had come from a burnt birthday cake rescue. But then the conversation shifted. Jake's fingers traced the rim of his mug, eyes watching the coffee swirl. You asked me once why I don't talk about the past. Rachel nodded. Only when you're ready. He was quiet for a moment. Then her name was Laura. Rachel sat still. My wife, Jake said. We met right before my 3rd deployment. I promised I wouldn't fall in love before I left. I broke that promise in 2 weeks. He smiled, but it was tinged with memory. She was loud where I was quiet. A teacher. She used to call my uniform just another apron. Said I was always serving something bigger than myself. When I got back, we tried to make it normal. Moved into a small place. Talked about kids. Built routines. Rachel's voice was soft. Ellie was born soon after he nodded. We called her our peacetime miracle. Laura said she was the universe's way of saying, well done. Rachel could feel her heart thudding. Jake looked down. But Laura got sick. Fast. Aggressive cancer. The doctors used words like months, but it was weeks. And I couldn't save her. His hands were steady, but his voice cracked just slightly. I'd saved strangers, pulled kids from wreckage, shielded soldiers with my body. But I couldn't stop that hospital monitor from going quiet. Rachel reached across the table, placed her hand over his. Jake didn't pull away. I held Ellie in one arm and Laura's hand in the other, he said, and I remember thinking this is the moment where I either fall apart or build something new. He looked up, so I chose to build. 1 meal at a time, 1 bedtime story, 1 morning routine. I started over not because I was strong, but because Ellie needed someone to show her how to live when love leaves. Rachel's throat tightened. And you did. Jake gave a soft exhale. Some days I think I did okay. Other days, I'm not so sure. They sat in silence for a while. No need to fill it. The waitress passed by, refilled their mugs without a word. Outside, headlights drifted past like quiet comets. Finally, Rachel whispered, "I've met a lot of men who talked about honor, but you're the first who lives it." Jake shook his head gently. "I'm just trying not to mess up the second half of my life." She smiled. Maybe that's where the best part begins. As they stood to leave, Rachel paused at the door, looking back at the humble diner. "Jake, thank you for letting me in." He met her gaze. "Thank you for staying." They stepped outside. The city buzzed behind them, alive with noise and light. But where they stood under a flickering sign and the whisper of autumn wind, the world felt quiet again, the kind of quiet that wasn't empty, but full of something waiting to grow. Jake looked at her one more time. "You're not what I expected, Rachel." She tilted her head. "Disappointed?" "No," he said. "Just surprised, in the best way." Then after a pause, he added softly, "Maybe peace doesn't come from silence after all. Maybe it comes from company that doesn't ask you to explain everything." She smiled. "Then I'll stay quiet, but close." And with that, they walked down the sidewalk side by side. No words, no hurry. Just two people carrying old scars and new hope into the night. It started with a name Rachel hadn't heard in 2 years. Max Langston. Once a rising star in New York's corporate scene, Max had been Rachel's fiercest rival, charming in the way that made people lean in, ruthless in the way that made them bleed. He was the kind of man who shook hands with one eye on your wallet and the other on your spine. Their last encounter ended in scandal. Max had tried to sabotage one of Rachel's acquisitions with falsified data. She'd exposed him. His investors fled. His name vanished from headlines, but not from memory. And now, apparently, he was back. Her assistant Julia had found the listing Max Langston's new shell company had placed a quiet bid on the building, directly across from the Crystal Garden. The plan was textbook Langston buy, cheap flood the block, with noise-poached staff and gut reputations with rumor. Rachel wasn't afraid for herself. But the Crystal Garden had become more than a business. It was Jake's workplace, Ellie's sanctuary, their unspoken corner of the world. She wasn't about to let someone like Max contaminate it. That afternoon, she slipped into the back entrance of the restaurant, her heels clicking sharply against the tile. The dining room was quiet between lunch and dinner rush. Jake was at the prep station chopping herbs, a dish towel slung over his shoulder. He looked up and smiled. "You okay, depends," she said, setting her bag down. "How do you feel about ghosts from the past?" He tilted his head. "Should I be worried?" She filled him in quickly. The building, the bid, Max Langston. Jake listened in silence, arms folded, leaning against the counter the way he always did when he was thinking deeply. When she finished, she added, "I can handle this. I've dealt with Max before. But I wanted you to know." Jake nodded slowly. "What's his endgame?" "Same as always, distraction, disruption, humiliation. He doesn't want the restaurant. He wants to make noise. I think he saw you with me the other night." Jake raised an eyebrow. "You think I'm the bait? I think he knows I care about you," she said plainly. Jake said nothing at first. Then he reached behind him, unteed his apron, and hung it gently on the wall. "I'll be back in 10 minutes, he said. Max didn't expect him. The door to the new shell office wasn't even painted yet. 2 folding chairs, a table, and a too expensive espresso machine sat inside. Max stood by the window, looking out at the Crystal Garden across the street, sipping from a metal tumbler. Jake pushed the door open without knocking. Max turned, that same smirk still pasted on his face, like a sticker that had lost its stick. "Well," Max said, "if it isn't the apron-wearing war hero, to what do I owe the honor?" Jake didn't smile. He didn't raise his voice. He stepped forward slow, deliberate. His posture wasn't threatening, but his presence was. "You think you're clever," Jake said evenly. "You think reputation is a game, that if you throw enough dirt, something sticks. But I've seen men like you in war zones and politics, in every corner of every place. People forget how to be decent." Max chuckled. "Touching. Did you rehearse that?" Jake took another step forward. "I'm not Rachel. I don't play with lawsuits and countersuits. I don't argue in press releases. But I know men like you, because I used to be one." Max's smirk faltered. Jake's voice dropped to a quiet steel. "You touch that restaurant. You breathe on that girl. You so much as walk across the street with bad intentions, and you'll find out real quick that some people don't need lawyers to end things." A pause. Jake leaned in just enough to make Max flinch. "You may know how to fight with lies, but I know how to stand in front of fire and not blink, and I promise you, I will not blink." He stepped back. "So if I were you, I'd pack up that overpriced coffee machine and go crawl back into whatever boardroom sewer you came from. Because around here, we protect what we care about." Jake turned, walked out, didn't slam the door, didn't look back. Just like all was calm, unshakable, undeniable. Rachel saw him walking back across the street from the window of the upstairs lounge. He wasn't rushed. He didn't look shaken. But there was something in the way he moved, a kind of finality. When he entered through the kitchen, she met him near the back counter. "Well, she asked." Jake picked up his apron, looped it over his head. "He's not coming back. That's it." He looked at her. "That's it." Rachel stared at him for a moment, then whispered, "What did you say to him?" Jake shrugged. "The truth. And a promise." She stepped closer. "Jake." He turned to her, quiet again. Still again. But this time his eyes held something new. Not just patience, not just strength, but claiming. "You don't owe anyone your peace," he said softly. "Not even ghosts." Rachel felt the tears well not from sadness, but from recognition. Recognition of a man who didn't need a title to lead. A man who didn't raise his voice to be heard. A man who didn't ask for love, but made you want to give it anyway. That night, Rachel walked into the kitchen as the dinner rush began. Jake was plating entrees, moving with calm precision. She leaned against the wall, arms crossed. What he asked, not looking up. "You threatened a man today." He nodded. "Technically, no. I made an observation and offered him an exit strategy." She smiled. "You're impossible." "Maybe." He handed her a plate. "But the pie's ready." She took it, turned, then paused. "Jake." He looked up. She stepped closer, held his gaze. "I never needed someone to fight for me. But I think I've always wanted someone who would." He said nothing. Just reached out, touched her hand once, and then turned back to the stove. And somehow, that single gesture said everything. It wasn't a holiday. It wasn't Ellie's birthday. It wasn't an excuse. It was just Tuesday. And Jake had texted Rachel just 7 words. Ellie made too many cookies. "Come over." She stared at her phone longer than she should have. The message was casual, almost offhand, but something about it felt different. There was no formality, no reason wrapped in obligation. Just an invitation. Rachel smiled. She replied with a simple, "On my way." The door opened before she knocked. Ellie stood there, flour on her nose, holding up a tray of lopsided cookies like they were Olympic gold. "We made oatmeal chocolate chip maple cinnamon, but not too much," she declared proudly. "Daddy says it's experimental." Jake appeared behind her, dish towel in hand. "I also said they might be a weapon in the wrong hands." Rachel laughed, stepping inside. "Then I came fully unarmed. The house smelled like sugar and cinnamon, and something even warmer, comfort." She noticed tiny details now. A new plant in the corner. A crayon drawing taped to the fridge that read, "Daddy plus me plus." Miss Rachel stick figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun. Her chest tightened just a little. Ellie grabbed her hand. Movie night rules. You sit next to Daddy. I get the middle pillow. Jake raised an eyebrow. She's been planning this since noon. Rachel gave him a teasing glance. You had me at too many cookies. They curled up on the couch, a blanket draped over all three of them. Ellie narrated the first 15 minutes of the animated movie with expert commentary and cookie crumbs on her cheeks. Eventually, her running narration faded. Her head nestled between them, her breathing slowed. Jake glanced down. She's out, he whispered. Rachel nodded, keeping her voice low. That was fast. She always fights it. But comfort wins. They sat in silence for a moment, the soft hum of the credits filling the room. Then Jake turned to her. You know, I didn't invite you over for the cookies. Rachel smiled softly. No. He shook his head. I just wanted you here. There it was. No mask, no protective silence. Just the truth laid bare in that quiet living room, like a candle flickering bravely in the dark. Rachel shifted slightly toward him, her voice low. I'm glad you asked. He looked at her, and for the first time since she met him, really looked, he smiled. Not the polite half-smile he used in the kitchen, or the tired grin reserved for Ellie's antics. This smile was different. It was full, open, unburdened, like something inside him had finally loosened after years of being knotted tight. Rachel reached out slowly, her hand resting on his. She felt the calluses, the heat, the steadiness. I like this version of you, she said, the one who lets himself want something. Jake exhaled almost like a laugh. I'm still learning how. You're doing fine, she whispered. They stayed like that for a while, no rush, no fear of what came next. Outside, the wind stirred the trees. Inside, Ellie slept soundly, her small fingers still wrapped around the edge of Rachel's sleeve. Jake looked down at his daughter, then back at Rachel. I never thought I'd get a second chapter, he said. Not like this. Rachel's voice was gentle. Sometimes the second chapter is where the real story begins. Later, after the movie ended, and Ellie was tucked into bed, hair-tousled limbs sprawled, Rachel stood near the front door, coat draped over her arm. Jake walked her out the porch, light, casting a soft golden glow over them both. She turned to face him. Thank you for tonight. He shook his head. I should be thanking you. For what? For not treating this like some pity project. For not seeing a broken man and trying to fix him. I don't see a broken man, she said. I see a man who rebuilt himself. One brick at a time. Jake looked at her, his eyes quiet but burning with something unspoken. Rachel stepped forward just close enough that the air shifted between them. I'm not here out of obligation, Jake. I know. I'm here because this, us, feels like something I didn't even know I needed. Jake let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Then he said simply, Me too. He reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, slow, deliberate. No urgency, just presence. Rachel closed her eyes for a moment, leaning slightly into his touch. Then she stepped back, smiled. I should go before I forget how? Jake chuckled. Ellie would keep you here forever if she could. I might let her. She turned toward her car, then paused, looking over her shoulder. Jake, yeah, that smile earlier. The real one. He waited. I hope I get to see it again. He nodded, voice quiet. You will. She drove off under a canopy of stars, and Jake stood there on the porch long after the headlights disappeared, hands in his pockets, heart steady in a way it hadn't been in years. Because tonight wasn't about cookies. It wasn't about the past. It was about choosing someone gently, honestly, without fear. And for the first time in a long time, he had. Rachel walked into the crystal garden with a different kind of energy. That morning part, excitement, part nerves, all purpose. The building buzzed with the usual rhythm, the clatter of cutlery being polished, the low hum of kitchen prep. George barking out a list of ingredients with military precision, but her eyes were searching for only one person. Jake. He was near the back, bent over a stainless steel counter, slicing pears with the same care he gave to everything steady, exact present. He looked up when she entered, wiped his hands on a towel, and gave her a soft smile. The kind that had become more familiar, more frequent. The kind that belonged to her now in quiet ways. "Hey," he said. "Didn't expect you this early." "Everything okay?" Rachel approached, holding a folder tucked under her arm. "I've been thinking." "That sounds dangerous." She rolled her eyes, then passed him the folder. "Just read it." Jake wiped his fingers again before taking it. He flipped it open, scanning the letterhead, the logos, the offer inside. His brow furrowed. He read the first page, then the second. Slower. When he finally looked up, his voice was even. "You're offering me a job," Rachel nodded. "Director of Operations. Not just here. All 5 of our East Coast restaurants. Full salary. Benefits. A team. Your own schedule. You'd still be home for Ellie's bedtime every night." Jake stared at her. "You're serious?" "I've never been more," she said. "Jake, you've been quietly holding this place together for years. You organize the prep schedules better than most trained chefs. You train new hires without a word of complaint. You deal with crisis better than anyone I've ever met. You're not just a great cook, you're a born leader. And I trust you." He closed the folder slowly, then set it on the counter. Silence stretched between them. "I appreciate it," he said carefully. But Jake exhaled. "Rachel, I used to be responsible for 30 men in a hostile zone. My name was on decisions that saved lives, and sometimes didn't. I carried that home. And when Laura got sick, and I had to raise Ellie on my own, I promised myself one thing." Rachel waited. "I promised that whatever I did next, it wouldn't be bigger than her, that she would always be the mission." Her heart ached at the simplicity of it, at the weight behind the words. "You could still do both," she said softly. "This job wouldn't pull you away." Jake shook his head gently. "Maybe. But right now, I like waking up early and packing her lunch. I like baking on Saturdays. I like having dirt under my nails from fixing the heater myself. I like being the guy who wears an apron and isn't trying to be more than that." Rachel's eyes shimmered. "You're already more, Jake." He smiled, touched her hand. "I know. But I'm more here. Not in a boardroom. Not on a flight to Boston. Here, with Ellie, with you." That last part came out quieter, but it landed like thunder. She swallowed. "You're really turning down a 6-figure job offer for lemon pie and science projects, without hesitation." A long pause, then they both laughed, quiet free. Later that evening, after the dinner shift ended and the lights dimmed, Rachel sat with Jake at the staff table in the back. The restaurant was silent now, the air filled only with the fading scent of garlic and rosemary. He handed her a plate, simple roasted vegetables and a piece of grilled fish. Nothing fancy, nothing curated. Not bad for a guy who refused a promotion, she teased. He grinned. "You're still getting my best work." She took a bite, closed her eyes. "Honestly, this is better than half the tasting menus I've had this year." Jake leaned back. "You know what I realized? What that I spent years thinking success was something with a title, or a ribbon, or a folded flag. But now I think it's something smaller, like Ellie falling asleep in the back seat while I hum old country songs, or you smiling across this table." Rachel set her fork down. "You don't need to be anyone else, Jake. Not for me. Not for this world." His voice softened. That's the first time anyone said that and meant it. She reached for his hand. "Then let me be the first of many. They sat in stillness again, but this time it was full of knowing, of trust, of something growing between them that didn't need definitions or timelines. Just presence. Just choice. Outside, the city moved on. Taxis honked, doors slammed, lives rushed. But inside that restaurant, beneath the soft amber glow of the kitchen, lights a man in an apron and a woman with the world at her fingertips shared a meal in perfect peace. And neither of them wanted to be anywhere else. Jake had never worn a suit, but tonight he did his best. He stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the collar of his dark navy button-up, one Rachel had picked out during a casual walk past a storefront 2 weeks earlier. His old olive jacket hung beside the door, like a piece of himself he'd leave at home for the evening. Ellie sat cross-legged on the bed behind him, swinging her legs. "You look like a movie star, Daddy." Jake gave a mock frown in the mirror. "You sure I don't look like someone trying too hard?" Ellie shook her head with complete conviction. "Nope. You look like someone who's about to dance with someone very pretty." He laughed, then turned and kissed her forehead. "Let's just try not to spill anything on this shirt before we get there. All right." The ballroom shimmered like something out of a dream. Crystal chandeliers spilled golden light onto marble floors. Dozens of guests in tailored suits and glittering gowns mingled, sipped champagne, and exchanged laughter over small plates of food, crafted by the city's most expensive caterers. Rachel's birthday gala was the kind of event where magazine photographers loitered by the entrance, and waiters never let a glass go empty. Jake walked in with Ellie's hand in his shirt neatly pressed. His boots shined the best he could manage. Ellie wore a deep blue dress with sparkly silver shoes and a ribbon in her hair that matched Jake's tie. Her idea, of course. Heads turned. Rachel spotted them instantly from across the room. Her breath caught for a second, not because they were out of place, but because they weren't. In a room full of polished perfection, they looked quietly right. She moved toward them, her red gown flowing like candlelight. Ellie ran ahead and wrapped her arms around Rachel's waist. "Happy birthday." Rachel bent down, hugged her tightly. "Thank you, sweetheart. You look like a star tonight." "I picked our colors," Ellie declared proudly. "Blue for bravery, silver for the moon." Rachel smiled. Perfect choices. She rose and faced Jake. For a moment, neither said a word. Then Rachel reached up and straightened his collar, her hand lingering just a little longer than necessary. "You clean up well," she whispered. Jake grinned. I had a very opinionated stylist. As the evening unfolded, Rachel moved from guest to guest. Gracious, poised, radiant, but always returning to Jake and Ellie, as if tethered by something unspoken. Jake kept to the edges, politely refusing canapes he couldn't pronounce, watching Ellie twirl across the dance floor with a kind older couple who took to her like family. He wasn't used to this world, the tuxedos, the polished speeches, the orchestrated laughter, but he wasn't intimidated by it either. He knew who he was, and more importantly, he knew why he was here. Because Rachel wanted him here, invited him. Because this time, he wasn't a bystander in someone else's story. Halfway through the evening, the MC took the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "if I may have your attention. Before we move to dessert, our host has a few words she'd like to share." Rachel stepped forward. A hush fell over the ballroom. She stood beneath the chandelier, her voice steady but soft. Her eyes didn't scan the room. They focused on just two people near the front, a little girl in a blue dress, and the man beside her, the one who never asked to be seen, but always stood when it mattered. "Tonight isn't just about birthdays," she began. "It's about beginnings, about gratitude, and about people who walk into your life not with noise, but with quiet acts that change everything." A few guests exchanged puzzled glances. Rachel continued, her voice unwavering. Some of you may know me as the CEO of Bennett Enterprises. Others may know me from headlines or conference stages. But the truth is, for most of my life, I've stood alone by choice, by necessity, sometimes by pride. She took a breath. And then one night, I found myself in danger. Real danger. Not business competition. Not media backlash. Real fear. And in that moment, someone stepped between me and harm without hesitation. He didn't ask for recognition. He didn't even ask for thanks. He simply stood there. For me. A hush deepened. Even the clinking of glasses stopped. Rachel looked straight at Jake. That man is here tonight. He's standing at the edge of this room, probably wishing this spotlight would pass. But I won't let it. Because every once in a while we meet someone who doesn't just protect us, they remind us of who we want to become. She stepped down slowly, heels echoing gently. I'd like to introduce two of my favorite people in this world, Jake Walker and his daughter Ellie. All eyes turned. Jake froze for a half-second, unsure. Ellie, however, beamed. She stood, took her dad's hand, and tugged. "Come on, Daddy," she whispered. "You already danced with danger. You can handle a birthday party." A ripple of warm laughter passed through the room. Jake rose. He walked with Ellie to the center of the ballroom, Rachel meeting them halfway. And in that moment, surrounded by power, wealth, and spectacle, the most powerful thing in the room was a man in a modest shirt, holding the hand of a child, and standing beside a woman who had finally let herself be known. The applause was not thunderous. It was real. Warm, sincere, lasting. Jake didn't bow. He didn't wave. He simply nodded once, the quiet acknowledgement of a man who had nothing to prove and everything to give. Rachel reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. And when the music started again, she leaned in. "Dance with me," she asked. I don't know how he murmured. She smiled. "Just follow my lead, like you always do." And there, in the soft glow of chandeliers and second chances, Jake Walker danced, not perfectly, not proudly, but present. And for the first time in years, he wasn't just surviving the moment. He was living it. The coffee pot hissed softly, releasing a warm scent that curled through the modest kitchen. Sunlight streamed through the worn blinds, striping the faded wooden floor in gold. The refrigerator hummed its steady rhythm, and from the living room, the gentle laughter of a little girl floated in like a song. Rachel stood barefoot in Jake's kitchen, wearing one of his flannel shirts over her dress from the night before. Her heels were tucked neatly by the door, replaced with Jake's oversized socks that slouched around her ankles. Her hair was still curled from the gala, but a few strands fell loose as she stirred cream into her coffee. She glanced around. The chipped counter, the old kettle with a dent near the handle, the coloring books on the table next to a half-eaten bowl of cereal. None of it matched the sleek, stainless world she'd built for herself. But here, in this tiny corner of the world, she felt more herself than she had in years. Jake stepped in, carrying a sleepy-eyed Ellie, wrapped in a fleece blanket with cartoon puppies. She woke up asking for pancakes and a story. He said, his voice rough from sleep, but laced with quiet joy. Rachel smiled and reached for Ellie, who leaned into her, without hesitation, resting her head on Rachel's shoulder. "Did you have fun last night?" Rachel whispered. Ellie nodded, eyes still heavy. "You were the prettiest birthday princess ever." And Daddy danced. Jake chuckled. "That's going to be legend in second grade for weeks." Rachel met his gaze over the top of Ellie's head. It was the kind of look that didn't need words, the kind born of battles shared and healing begun. Jake poured himself a cup of coffee and leaned against the sink. "Still think you belong in skyscrapers and press briefings?" he asked, half teasing. Rachel took a slow breath. "I used to think that was the only place I could belong," she admitted. "But now, I think I was just too scared to come down." He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he watched as she tucked a blanket around Ellie and settled her into the chair at the kitchen table. "I spent so many years building walls," she continued. "Polished ones, efficient ones, and they protected me from disappointment. But they also kept out joy. Real joy. Like this." Jake looked at her, really looked, and saw the woman beyond the CEO title, a woman who had fought battles he couldn't see, who had learned to survive in a world that rarely offered second chances. Just like him. Rachel reached into her purse, pulled out a folded paper, and slid it across the table. Jake raised an eyebrow and opened it. It was a partnership agreement, hand-signed, transferring 25% ownership of a new foundation into his name, the Walker Initiative for Veterans and Families. Jake blinked. "You did this," Rachel nodded. "It's time," she said softly, "to build something real, for people who were forgotten after they gave everything, for little girls who need safe places, for dads who think they have nothing left to offer." He set the paper down. "I didn't do any of this to get a name on a board," he said quietly. "I know," she replied. "That's why your name belongs on it." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Ellie chimed in from the table. "Can Rachel live here too? It would save her gas money." Jake coughed on his coffee. Rachel laughed, a real open laugh that filled the kitchen with light. "Well," she said, crouching next to Ellie, "that depends. Does your dad know how to fold laundry?" Ellie considered this deeply. "He's trying." Rachel looked up at Jake. "We can try too." "Can't we?" He didn't answer with words. He stepped closer, rested a hand gently on her cheek, and kissed her soft and unhurried, like the beginning of something sacred. When they pulled apart, Ellie grinned. "Does this mean we get pancakes and a puppy?" Later that afternoon, the three of them stood outside the small garage Jake had inherited from his grandfather. The old sign still creaked in the wind, Walker's Repair and Supply. Paint peeled at the corners, but the door was open, and the inside freshly swept. Rachel handed Jake a small plaque, burnished brass, clean lettering. He ran a finger over the words, "In honor of those who serve and those who heal. This is a place of second chances." He cleared his throat, suddenly overwhelmed. Rachel whispered, "Let's build more than engines here, Jake. Let's build hope." He nodded. Together. She smiled. Always. 1 year later, the new Walker Center opened with a modest ceremony. No red carpets, no reporters, just a group of veterans' kids with messy hair and a community that had learned to breathe again. Jake wore the same flannel shirt. Rachel held Ellie's hand as they cut the ribbon, and above them, the wind caught the banner strung across the entrance, where 3 words shimmered in the sun. Home at last. Because sometimes the bravest thing a soldier can do is stop surviving and start living again. Before you go, we'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city or state in the comments below. It always warms our hearts to see how far these stories travel. If this story touched you or made you smile even just a little, consider subscribing. It helps us keep sharing more stories of hope, healing, and the quiet strength of everyday heroes. Thank you truly for spending your time with us. Until next time, stay kind, stay strong, and never underestimate the power of a good heart.